Our politically incorrect story tonight. You may have seen the New York Times article a few weeks ago about the man in Tennessee who traveled across the state buying over 17,000 bottles of hand sanitizer to be sold at a higher rate. Amazon and eBay both refused to let him sell the bottles of hand sanitizer on their platforms, citing price gouging. Eventually, the government stepped in to essentially seize his stockpile. He says after authorities visited him, he voluntarily chose to donate the supply. In the military, I think they call that voluntold. And President Trump soon after signed an executive order to prevent price gouging. The man in Tennessee was, of course, roundly criticized, but our next guest has the unpopular opinion that price gouging could be a good thing. With me now, visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Feulner Institute, Dr. James Otteson. Dr. Otteson, thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, so I want to talk about bailouts with you. I want to talk about how our economy is going to recover. But first of all, talk to me about price gouging here, because this man in Tennessee, and he's not the only one, he was roundly criticized in a totally apolitical way for what he did. People on both sides of the aisle piled on. But you said sometimes the economy can be counterintuitive and that price gouging could actually be helpful. How so?
Well, we have to remember that we start out with the premise that our resources are limited. We have scarce resources, so the hard thing to figure out how to do is where the most important uses of our resources are and how we get them there. And prices can be a signal for that. So when prices go up, that signals to producers to make more or to sell more, and it signals to buyers to buy less. And so now if you think about this not in an emergency situation, just in a normal situation, if the price of gasoline goes up to $10 a gallon, well, people stop buying as much, they stop driving as much, they conserve their gas. On the other hand, if the gasoline price goes down to $1 a gallon, well, everybody fills up and everybody goes on long trips. So now think about this in regard to specifically things like in an emergency situation, needed goods and services. If the price stays low, stays whatever it was, say, before the emergency hit, well, then what happens? Demand goes up, there's a spike in demand, and everybody rushes to buy the good at whatever price it used to be. And if there isn't a calibrated increase in price, producers don't make more, and you have a shortage. And that's exactly what we have. So what can happen is that if we allow prices to go up, then some people who don't really need the good or service, like who don't really need the toilet paper, who don't really need the paper towels, et cetera, or even the masks, they stop buying them because the prices have gone up, which means that leaves more for the people who truly do need them. So prices can act as important calibrators and coordinators of goods and services, supply and demand, and they can help ensure increases in prices can help ensure that goods are actually there for the people who need them most.
So basically you're saying that it's a market-based way versus a legal way to prevent stockpiling.
Right. I mean, you can have, as we have had, you can have governors and the president saying to people, hey, don't buy too much, don't hoard goods and services. Well, okay, and we can appeal to their good wishes and hope that they listen. But a much more direct way to get that is by letting the price go up. And as prices go up for things, people just buy less of it. You don't have to tell them to. They do it all on their own.
And so this all makes perfect sense to me, but you know this is a very unpopular opinion.
Yes, yes, I'm aware of that. And especially because, I mean, when you have a time of emergency, when you have a pandemic, what people want is they want the goods that they need, they want them now, and they don't want to have to pay more for them. And if we had all the goods and services in the world and all the money in the world, well, then we could make that happen. But unfortunately, there are always lags, and we can't always anticipate every shock to the system. And that's something that prices can often do much better than politicians or centralized figures. They can communicate those signals very quickly and encourage producers to make more. If the prices go up, you get more producers who figure out ways to create more of the good because they want to be able to supply that demand.
Yeah, like I said, it makes perfect sense to me, especially, and we've seen it play out before our very eyes. People buying months' worth of toilet paper or more hand sanitizer than any one family could ever use. Right. Meanwhile, the people who actually also need those things aren't able to get it because of the stockpiling, price gouging, if you will. Or increasing the price does slow down the demand for stockpiling. It makes perfect sense. Okay, now transition. I want to ask you about your theory on bailouts here. So we've seen just astronomical, I don't even know a hyperbolic word to describe the amount of money that's in these $6 trillion, I believe it is, bailouts from the Trump administration, bipartisan in Congress. I am not in favor of these. I think these are way too much money. We have no way to pay for them. They're full of political pork. But from a purely market-based standpoint, you say these are not a good idea either, not just politically.
You have, in a time of emergency, you have the confluence of two bad things, two dangerous things. On the one hand, you have politicians who are politicians, and we shouldn't be surprised when politicians act like politicians. But on the other hand, you have a sudden emergency. And when you have a sudden emergency, people want to act, and they want to act now. And when you move very quickly into trying to do something, anything, you're going to get everything but the kitchen sink thrown into it. And so what we have seen in the bailouts, I mean, in the first huge, what's the right word, historic, the $2 trillion that has been allocated to this. And maybe this will just be the first. There might be more coming down the road. But what you see is not only the targeted help for industries that need some bridge to get over this economic lockdown, but you see all sorts of other things added in there, too, because politicians see an opportunity to get the things that they couldn't convince their colleagues or their voters to support under normal times, but they think they can use this as leverage to get it now. And so you're getting a lot of good, but you're getting in a lot of bad as well. And that, I mean, if you're going to have a bailout that actually, or if you're going to have a program that's going to help the economy, what you want it is to be targeted. You want it to be temporary. That's really important. And the stuff that's in it has to be actually targeted to addressing the emergency, not just all the other things that people might like.
Right. Not giving $25 million to the JFK Center for Performing Arts, for example, or Pelosi's. And I know this part wasn't successful, but she tried to throw in abortion provisions. All of that, I think you use the proper phrase. You say that bailouts create a moral hazard. And I think that's correct because it creates a situation where the people, the electorate, look to government and think that not only is government the answer, but that throwing money at the problem is the answer. That being said, I'm not opposed, clearly, to government playing a role in making sure that small businesses and individuals are able to subsist when it's government's fault that they're not able to engage in the private market. There is a role for government to play since government has been the one that has locked down our economy. They need to make sure that people's businesses aren't going to go under. They need to make sure that people are able to pay their rent and put food on the table. These bills, I don't think these bailouts are a good example of that. Dr. Otteson, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your perspective.